Good afternoon, we're the group number 10 and we're going to present the conflict and negotiation. So we're going to begin explaining what is a conflict and then a negotiation. So the conflict is a process that begins when one party perceives that the other one has negatively affected or is about to affect something that the first party cares about. So the conflicts are classified based on their effects. The first one is the functional conflict, and the second one is the dysfunctional conflict. The first one supports the goal of the group, and the second one hinders group performance. There are 6 types of conflict, which are task, relationship, process, dyadic, intragroup, and intergroup. The task conflict relates to the content and the goal of the work. The relationship focuses on interpersonal relationship. The process is about the way the work gets done. The dyadic conflict between two people, the intragroup, occurs within a group or large team, and the intergroup is a conflict between groups or teams. Now we're going to explain the stages of the conflict process. It has 5 stages, which are potential opposition and incompatibility, cognition and personalization, intentions, behavior, and outcomes. Moreover, the first stage, which is potential opposition and incompatibility, manage the appearance of conditions that create opportunities for it to arise. These are communication, structure, or personal variables. In the second stage, the conflict is defined, is known as perceived conflict, and is the awareness by one or more parties of the existence of the conditions that create opportunities for conflict to arise. Also, the emotions are expressed that have a strong impact on the eventual outcome. There are 2 types, which are the felt conflict, that is the emotional involvement in a conflict creating anxiety, tension, frustration, or hostility. And also, it's important to know that emotions play a major role in shaping perceptions. The third stage are the intentions, which are decisions to act in a certain way. And when there's a conflict, it can present it, competing, collaborating, avoiding, accommodation, or compromising intentions. So when it's a competing, there's a desire to satisfy one's interest, regardless impact of the other party to the conflict. When it's collaborating, there's a situation in which the parties to be conflict each desire to satisfy fully the concerns of all parties. The third one is the avoiding, which is the desire to withdraw from or suppress a conflict. The accommodation is the willingness of one party in a conflict to place the opponent's interest above his or her own, in this case our own. And compromising are the situations in which each party to a conflict is willing to give up something. The last stage are the behaviors and the outcomes, which include statements, actions, and reactions made by conflict parties, usually as overt attempts to implement their own intentions. So the conflict that reach the upper range of the continuum are almost always dysfunctional, and the functional conflicts are typically confined to the lower range of the continuum. And the outcomes may be functional if it improves the group performance or dysfunctional if it hinders the performance.
Okay, so now we will focus on negotiation, which often resolves conflict. So what is negotiation? It can be defined as a process that occurs when 2 or more parties decide how to allocate scarce resources. A negotiation can occur in an everyday situation, such as when 2 people try to agree on the time of a meeting, or it can occur at corporate levels when 2 or more organizations need to reach an agreement that is important to both of them. There are 2 general ways to approach a negotiation. These are distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining. What is distributive bargaining? It is a negotiation that seeks to divide up a fixed amount of resources. It is a win-lose situation. It operates under zero-sum conditions. That is, any gain I make is at your expense, and vice versa. On the other hand, integrative bargaining is a negotiation that seeks one or more settlements that can create a win-win solution. In contrast to distributive bargaining, this approach assumes that one or more of the possible settlements can create a win-win solution. Negotiation can be seen as a process that is made up of 5 steps. These are: first, preparation and planning. Second, definition of ground rules. Third, clarification and justification. Fourth, bargaining and problem solving. And the final step is closure and implementation. The preparation and planning step takes place before the actual negotiation and is where you must search all the available information to try to answer the following questions. What's the nature of the conflict? What's the history leading up to this negotiation? Who's involved and what are their perceptions of the conflict? What do you want from the negotiation? And most important, what are your goals? Next step is the definition of ground rules. This is one of the most important steps of the process because it is when you define with the other party the conditions and rules of the negotiation itself. So here you will need to clarify who will do the negotiating, where will it take place, what time constraints, if any, will apply, to what issues will negotiating be limited, and if you will follow a specific procedure if an impasse is reached. In the clarification and justification step, you and the other party will explain, amplify, clarify, bolster, and justify your original demands. It is fundamental that you support your position with some documentation and data. Next step is the bargaining and problem solving. It is the essence of the whole negotiation, and this is where both parties need to make concessions. Finally, we have the closure and implementation of the negotiation, in which the agreement is formalized and is fundamental to establish the plan of action that will be followed to monitor the correct implementation of the agreement. Regarding the individual differences in negotiation effectiveness, there are four factors that may influence the way in which an individual negotiates. These are his personality, as his level of agreeableness or self-efficacy, for example, the emotions that he shows during the negotiation process, the culture he comes from, and his gender. Sometimes individuals or group representatives reach a stalemate and are unable to resolve their differences through direct negotiations. This is where the third-party negotiations are necessary. In this type of negotiations, there are three roles. The mediator, who is a neutral third party who facilitates a negotiated solution by using reasoning, persuasion, and suggestion for alternatives. The arbitrator, who is a third party to a negotiation who has the authority to dictate an agreement, and the conciliator, who is a trusted third party who provides an informal communication link between the negotiator and the opponent.
Okay, so now following what my teammates have said, we're going to move on with examples of conflict in university life. So how it's going to work is I'm going to read the example, give you a little bit of context and what should you expect and things like that, and if it leads to a functional outcome or a dysfunctional outcome and the analysis of that. So first of all, the first example is you have been paired up with a person you don't really like and rubs you the wrong way, mainly because he or she works in a way you're not accustomed and is quite different from yours. So basically, here what it's saying, it's you have been paired with someone you don't really like because they work different from you. Let's say you like to do things a day or 2 days before, or she or he likes to do it a week before. So what you should actually try to do here is use a negotiation like steps to look for a good course of action. So I'm going to read them once. It's prep and plan, then define ground rules, then clarification and justification, then bargaining and problem solving, and the last one is closure and implementation. So you should sit down with the other person, don't let any personal feelings get in the way of the objective, and define some ground rules and kind of meet them halfway, because in this part it's sort of a let's say pie thing. You guys have to give something in and you just have to find the best way to do it, leaving all the personal issues behind. So it's also a pie thing and also integrative bargaining, and it's you have to settle in more than one front usually to look for the best outcome. So you should probably follow the steps of the thing and look for the functional outcome. If you find yourself in a dysfunctional outcome, just try and look what you could have done better, because sometimes it's out of your hands, but you should usually try and do that. So the second one is you have to design a plan which is the one your group will follow to complete the assignment in due time. Someone does not agree with the way you design the plan as they see it as too structured and rigid. They may even get a little upset that something is being imposed upon them. So this has to do a lot with personality. Basically, some people are very conscientious, some people are not. And as we have seen in the class, people don't like to be obligated or pushed to do something. They like a little bit of freedom, even if you can persuade them. So what I would actually do is try to persuade them in the way to make them think that the obligation is not theirs, that you're not imposing anything onto them. If this doesn't work, then you should actually go and try to follow the negotiations plan. And again, meet them halfway. But you should always try and persuade someone. People like to be persuaded, not obligated. So that's what I think is important too in this part. And always try to look for a functional outcome, because conflicts are not necessarily bad. Conflicts are only bad when they lead to negative outcomes. But if you can actually enrich yourself from how the other person works, and the other person can enrich on how you work, it'll be great for both sides. There is another example, and I will go in further detail if we have time at the end of the presentation. But right now I'm going to go into the other example, the next slide. So, examples of negotiation. So since we've talked a lot about in school, I'm going to talk about something that's sort of in school, but not that in school. Assuming next semester is virtual, you have decided to do something different next semester, like learning a new language or work virtually. However, your parents are against that as they see it as a waste of time, but they are usually understanding when presented with logical information. How do you attempt to negotiate the situation for your benefit? So, this has to do mainly about how to involve feelings in negotiation. When you have interpersonal relationship with people, I forgot to say that the other examples, the first one was a relationship conflict, which is basically within a group. And the second one was task conflict mixed with the relationship conflict. Task conflict, it relates to the content and goals. So in this one, the one I just read, you should try to persuade them in a way by using feelings. I'm not saying manipulate them, but just be a little less professional, let's say. Show what you're feeling in a much more transparent way, because that actually helps in negotiation. You use the steps, and basically when it's clarification and justification, you should express what you're feeling, because most of the time that makes the other person empathetic towards your situation, and that is a really good way to negotiate things, especially with people who care about you. On the other hand, if you're like on the next example I'm going to read, which is you need an extension of a deadline for an essay you have to hand in, you also know your professor is not very flexible. How do you approach the situation? You should definitely not use feelings there, because it's not a professional thing. You should really understand that context matters, as we've seen in attitudes, emotions, incentives, everything. Context is key. So if you can actually find a way to put a little feeling in there, it's great. If not, try to avoid that. And always use the 5 steps that we already discussed, because that will most likely give you the best probability of functional outcome, which is usually a win-win, but it can be a win-lose. But try to make it a win-win, and if it's a win-lose, a win for you at least. So my teammates will continue.